Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Previously nominated for the very prestigious German Literary Award Ingeborg Bachmann Prize, today's author brings us in a novel an intimate portrait of two families that span 3 generations amidst turbulent political change in 1960 East Germany. Welcome to The Author Show. I'm Danya Hampson, your host. The title of the book I just mentioned is Distant Signs, and its author is Anne Richter, who is with me today. Welcome to the show, Anne.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you are quite welcome. Now, Anne, you are from Germany, specifically what used to be known as East Germany or the German Democratic Republic. You still live in Germany, where you teach languages and you also write. Now, do you write in English, in German, or both?
Oh, that's right, that I combine teaching languages with my writing work, but actually I only really write in German. One time I wrote a song in English, and once I tried writing some poems in French, because French is my first foreign language. It's very different writing in a foreign language. You approach it entirely differently. You don't write naturally as you would in your native language, and you deliberate over each and every word. But I prefer to write in German because I can express myself more fully, more deeply.
Well, so you wrote Distant Signs in German. So would you please walk us a little through your translation journey to bring the book in the English-speaking market?
I met my translator, Douglas Irving, at a reading I gave from the original version of Distant Signs, which in German is titled Fremde Zeichen, and was published in German in 2013. I had never met Douglas before, and we chatted about my book, and he took home a copy, and over a period of time he got interested in the themes of my novel and decided to translate it into English and to look for a publisher. Of course, we were both very happy when Neem Press offered us a contract to publish the translation. By the way, Douglas is a very gifted translator and takes great care over his work. Over many months, we exchanged many emails to clear up passages to try to eliminate any dubiety. For instance, we discussed the connotations of particular words and how certain sentences might be interpreted. But our email discussions also touched on political events in the German Democratic Republic, or the GDR, which were important for Douglas to understand and interpret within the story, but also in an end glossary, which we decided to include after much debate with the publisher. And then late last year, I was invited to London by Neem Press to meet its director, Archana Sharma. Douglas was also able to attend, and we discussed the final details of Distant Signs prior to publication in the UK in February of this year.
Well, I'm glad to hear that he is very thorough in his translations, because I just had some experience with translators, and not all of them are that way. So it's very good to know that you had such a good translation. So congratulations, you got very, very lucky. Now,
Thank you.
Now, Anne, what is your specific target audience? In other words, who did you write your book for? And I know you wrote it originally in German, so obviously from a geographic location initially was probably for just the German-Austrian market, but you expanded since then. So who did you write your book for?
Yes, I would say Distant Signs is for readers interested in human relationship, especially within families, but also anyone interested in 20th century German and European history. The book will appeal to readers who want to know more about East Germany and understand what life was really like in that country, beyond the Cold War cliches and stereotypes.
Now, could you give us, because we haven't done that yet, could you give us just a very quick summary of Distant Signs?
Yes, of course, sure. My novel offers a portrayal of family relationships against the backdrop of various social milieus in the former GDR. The two main protagonists, Hans and Margret, meet at the start of the 1960s on an agricultural placement and marry soon after. Whereas Hans comes from a village in the Thuringian forest, Margaret has grown up in a nearby city, the daughter of an academic. And when they marry, neither of them has an idea of the emotional baggage each is carrying. Distant Science charts Hans and Margaret's failure to communicate, but also communication failures across the generations in terms of, amongst other things, the Second World War and the post-war experiences of several family members. Only the third generation, represented by Margaret's and Hans' daughter, Sonja, seems to be capable of, at least in part, freeing itself from this difficult legacy. My novel ends several years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, so if you include several flashbacks to the war, it spans about 60 years.
I happen to love history, so to me, this kind of book is extremely interesting. And I have been myself to East Germany a long, long time ago when the wall was still up.
Oh.
Yeah, I was there for some time. Now, Distant Signs, what is the significance of the book title?
As I say, the central theme of Distant Signs is really communication failure between family members. So the distant signs of the title refer to the signs or to the signals that the other person fails to see or read. The characters try to communicate but aren't quite able to connect, nor can they fully understand what it is they actually want to communicate. The German title, Fremde Zeichen, came to me from a poem by the Austrian poet Ingeborg Bachmann. The word fremd can mean strange or foreign, and the word Zeichen would probably translate into English as signs. Douglas and I decided that Distant Signs worked best in terms of the novel's themes. There is the idea of people being distant, but at the same time the title implies signs of hope, and hopeful signs do start to appear near the end of my story. So there's actually quite a lot going on in the title, despite it being very short.
Right. Yeah, I can see that, absolutely. Now tell us, Anne, what inspired you to write Distant Signs, and how much of your own experiences of growing up in East Germany during the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall went into the book?
Oh, well, when my daughter was born in 2001, I started thinking more about what it means to have your own family, and I got interested in the lives of my ancestors. I think this is fairly common. Yeah. When the next generation is born, you ask yourself, how did previous generations live? Huh? Right. How did they cope with family life and raising children? When I was a child, my grandmother and we didn't have that close a relationship. But after my daughter's birth, I wanted to try to understand why my grandmother was such a strong but also dominant woman. So I kind of interviewed her. And she taught me quite a lot about German politics from the 1930s to the 80s, but mostly about her way of life in a small German village. Later on, I thought it would be interesting to write about a married couple from completely different social backgrounds. One would grow up in a village like my grandmother's, and the other in an academic environment. Well, it's clear that problems would arise. As for myself, growing up in the 70s and the 80s in the GDR, I was, like Sonja, for instance, a member of the official children and youth organizations. But most important of all, I witnessed the reunification of East and West Germany in 1990 as a 70-year-old. That was really a crazy and confusing time for me. Everything changed so fast. Overnight, the social system was transformed out of recognition. At school, none of the teachers had a clue what to teach, and my father lost his job when his company fired thousands of employees. And then I started to travel, and I spent 1 year in Marseille. Many of these aspects of my and my family's experiences feature in my book.
Now, you, of course, wrote Distant Signs. It's set in Germany, but could it also be set in another time or another place?
That's a very interesting question. I'd have to say yes and no. Yes, because Distant Signs is a family saga about relationship difficulties that could be experienced anywhere and at any time. The problems my characters face are universal in a way. They fight for survival in war. They have to find their place in society and a means to communicate with each other. On the other hand, I'd say no, because the specific setting of the GDR is crucial for my characters and lets me write on a deeper level about human beings in that specific social context. Let me give you an example. Margaret's father Friedrich was in prison during World War II because he fought against Hitler. And after the war, he has this ideal of a pacifist socialist society, but at the same time he is gripped by a very real fear because of his war experiences. And this makes him open to blackmail. So he turns a blind eye on the increasingly authoritarian attitude of the GDR government, because he desperately wants the socialist experiment to succeed. And in addition, he's not brave enough to stand up to those in power.
Well, this is so apropos of the times, of course, and all of this can fit, of course, in historic fiction genre, but it can also fit in the saga genre and relationships. Can you tell us a little bit more about the trials and the tribulations the families face in your story?
Sure. Let me tell you about the central characters of Hans and Margaret, both emotionally scarred. Hans from being raised an only child by a domineering and overbearing mother and losing his father to an unnamed illness, and Margaret from her childhood in a privileged academic household, suffering from a distant father and a mother troubled by health issues. They both bear their childhood scars into adulthood, so that when they marry, they find themselves unable to open up and communicate properly. Their married life is marred by relationship difficulties. Margaret is further hampered by her rather frosty relationship with her mother-in-law. At one point in the book, Hans and Margaret's relationship problems reach a climax when they visit Hans's mother in her village in winter with their 2 children. There is snow lying all around. The village is virtually snowed in, and Margaret finds herself cooped up with this domineering older woman who is serving up a rustic stew containing chunks of fatty meat, the whole family crammed into a steamed-up kitchen. And she thinks to herself she would have happily got up and taken a walk in the nearby snow forest. It seems mundane, but at that moment, Margaret feels terribly trapped in this awkward domestic situation, and I imagine Margaret's experience of a strong-willed mother-in-law will resonate with some readers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, you write from multiple perspectives in your book. Why did you choose this style of novel writing, and what do you hope that it will add to the reader's experience?
The characters in Distant Signs are, of course, Hans and Margaret, then their 2 sets of parents and their daughter, Sonja, so 7 characters in total. Each character has his or her own chapter in the book, some only one, others several, whereby they find their own individual voice. The reader can then see characters and events from a variety of angles. Each character has his or her own viewpoint and their own reasons for seeing things their way. No one character is absolutely right or wrong, and no one is condemned for their actions. I've actually tried very hard to represent my characters fairly, and I hope the reader can understand them, perhaps even sympathize with them.
Yeah. Of all the books that you have read, to which would you most hope that yours, for example, would be displayed next to on a shelf in a bookstore?
What a difficult question. There are so many good books. Could I have one book to either side of mine?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. In that case, I'd like to see my book displayed between any novel by the great East German writer Christa Wolf, who is one of my favorite female writers, and the work of William Shakespeare, either Hamlet or a book of his sonnets.
That's quite a different style.
Yes, indeed it is, yes.
Now, Anne, will you share with us an excerpt from Distant Signs?
Yes, I'll read a short passage which describes Hans and Margaret's first encounter from Hans's perspective. They are married by this time, and Hans is reflecting on the night they first met, out walking in the dark on their farm placement. When she came up to him that first time on his evening winter walk, he had already felt then how delicate and vulnerable she is. She had attracted him because he was frightened by the vigorous, unladylike way the young women from his village moved, lifted turnips from the earth, shouldered scythes and hoisted baskets of hay or apples. One day in the field he had watched one of them tie her headscarf, fast and furious, and so tight as though packaging up her own head. She wore a scarf of the kind his mother has an endless supply of, and tied it the same way, even though she could barely have been 20 years old. Hans, aged 15, had felt both attracted and repelled by her. Later a wind had got up, and he had felt the cold at his hairline and ears, whereas the woman hardly seemed to notice. Hans had also felt uncomfortable with Margaret on that first evening. She knew how to choose her words and spoke without an accent. He had overcome his inhibition by talking, hardly letting her speak, and she had listened and responded without laughing at his dialect. Eventually Hans had relaxed and even offered her his gloves, although his heart raced as he did.
Well, that starts describing the beginning of that relationship. It's a sweet passage.
Yes.
Back to the target audience that we talked about earlier. You mentioned, of course, your target audience, but what other reader demographics do you think could also benefit from reading your book, your novel?
I could imagine that young adults or older teenagers would also get something from reading my book because it deals with problems between children and parents, which is a timeless subject, as well as the fraught love story of Hans and Margaret. I've actually had some positive feedback from school children in France who read the novel as part of their curriculum. At the same time, Distant Science tells the story of a country that no longer exists, but it was experienced by many Germans belonging to the parents' and grandparents' generations of young people today, which is not that far away in terms of time. So GDR history is something young people might be interested to learn about.
Yeah, because the historical component is very important in it as well. But you just mentioned that French students read your book. Now, in what language did they read it? In German?
In German, German,
okay.
Yes, I talk about French pupils that are learning German at school.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, yes. Anne, how can readers find out more about you and about your work, and where can your book be purchased?
There are several websites readers can visit of my German publisher, Osburg Verlag, which is in German, and my English language publisher, Neem Press, where you can find information about me and my work, for instance, creative grants I got or other books I wrote. Distant Science is the first book I've had translated into English, and readers should be able to find my book at all online bookstores as well as in their local bookstore, and also as an e-book. In addition, the translation has been reviewed in the UK, mainly through online blogs, and there's also a virtual blog tour starting today. So you can easily find that if you search for the book title and for my name on the internet.
Okay, wonderful. And let me spell the publisher, at least the English publisher. I'm not going to try to spell the German one. I'll let you do that. But the English publishing house is neemtreepress.com. That's N as in Nancy, E, M as in Mary, T as in Tom, REE press.com. And thank you so much for spending some time with me today. And obviously you're going to be writing other books. So when you release your next book, will you come back and chat with me again?
Yes, sure. Yes. I would be glad. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now I will close with a short excerpt of one review of Anne's book. Quote, "Distant Signs goes some way to explaining how life was lived in the East after the war, but before the fall of the wall. The stark contrast between characters are beautifully portrayed. The writing is spare, with no flowery prose or unnecessary descriptives, and the translation is done well, with the inclusion of some phrases and words that may be unfamiliar to the British reader, but are explained at the back of the book. This is a compelling, quiet, and finely crafted novel that demonstrates well the effect of the war and the aftermath of ordinary citizens." End of quote. Distant Signs is the title of the book by author Anne Richter, and that's Richter. Go out there, buy it today, and please share this interview with your friends so that they too have the opportunity to discover our guest Anne and her work. And remember, The Author Show may be accessed at any time at theauthorshow.com. Plus, selected interviews can also be found on major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, as well as many more. And whether you are an author who would like to be featured on our program or a reader in search for new books to read, theauthorshow.com is a great place to start. I'm Danielle Hampson. Thank you for listening. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. Find out more about authors and their work at theauthorshow.com. Theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.